They said the war was over, but in Georgia, the hate never stopped. Eden Walker, a kind, beautiful black woman, believed freedom meant safety. She tended her land, whispered her husband's name to the night, and prayed peace might finally come. Then one evening, they came riding. White hoods, torches, laughter that sounded like war drums. What they did to her beneath that burning cross wasn't about punishment. It was about power. They thought she'd stay silent, broken, forgotten. But the man they buried on the battlefield, her husband, Isaac Walker, was not dead. He was a Union scout trained to hunt killers in the dark. And now, he's come home. When he learns what the Klan did, the ghosts of the war wake again. Only this time, they wear his face. Because Eden's pain became his mission. And for every cross they burned, he'll raise a grave. They ended the war. He started the reckoning. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The Georgia sun rose red as an old wound. Eden Walker stood at the edge of her field, dirt already beneath her fingernails, watching the light creep over the pines. The church bells rang from Millstone, 3 miles distant, their sound thin and lonely across the morning fog. She'd been awake since before first light, as always, because sleep came hard in a house that remembered too much silence. Her cabin sat small and weathered at the field's edge, its boards gray from rain and sun. Smoke rose from the chimney in a pale thread. She'd built the fire herself, boiled water for washing, and eaten yesterday's cornbread with her hands still cold from the pump. Now the day's real work began. The cotton plants stood in neat rows, barely knee-high, their leaves bright green against the red clay. She'd planted them herself, turned every inch of soil with her own hands, hauled water when the rain didn't come. The land was hers, bought through the Freedmen's Bureau with money Isaac had sent during the war. Money earned in blood, though he'd never said whose. Eden moved down the first row, checking each plant for beetles, pulling weeds that grew faster than anything good. Her dress was plain brown cotton, patched at the elbows, its hem heavy with morning dew. She'd tied her hair back with a strip of cloth, the way her mother had taught her years ago on a different plantation, in a different life. The air hung thick and wet. Humidity settled on her skin like a second dress. Somewhere in the pines, a mockingbird ran through its repertoire of stolen songs. Eden straightened, pressed one hand to the small of her back, and let herself think what she thought every morning. He's coming home. Isaac Walker, her husband, missing since April of 1865, 2 years gone now, vanished somewhere in the chaos of Sherman's final push. The Union Army said he'd been captured during a scouting mission near Savannah. They said Confederate irregulars had hanged him from a bridge as a warning to other black soldiers. They said a lot of things, but they never sent a body. Eden didn't believe them. She kept his coat beneath her bed, folded careful as a flag, blue wool, faded nearly gray, with corporal's stripes on the sleeves. It still smelled like him. Gunpowder and sweat, and the leather oil he'd used on his boots. At night, when the dark pressed too close, she'd take it out and hold it against her face and whisper things she couldn't say in daylight. I'm waiting. I'm still here. Come home. She kept a candle in the window every night. Let it burn until the wax ran low, until the flame guttered in its own pooled tallow. Someone had told her once that the dead could see such lights, could follow them home through whatever darkness held them. She didn't know if she believed in ghosts, but she believed in stubbornness. The sun climbed higher, heat pressed down like a hand. Eden finished the first section of field and moved to check her vegetable garden, tomatoes and squash and pole beans climbing their stakes. Everything grew slower than it should. The soil here was tired, worn out from years of cotton, but she worked it anyway. Added what manure she could trade for, turned compost into the rows, coaxed life from exhaustion. Around midday, she loaded her wagon with vegetables, tomatoes mostly, some early squash, bundles of greens. She'd sell them in town, same as every week, to the white merchants who'd take her produce but wouldn't meet her eyes. The road to Millstone ran straight through pine forest, rutted deep from rain. Eden walked beside the wagon, leading the mule, a patient gray animal she'd named Patience because it suited them both. The trees made shadows across the road, cool patches that felt like blessings. Town smelled like sawdust and horse manure and the bitter smoke from the cotton gin. Eden pulled up outside Harwell's general store, tied Patience to the rail, and carried her first basket to the back entrance. That's where colored folks did business, never through the front door. Mr. Harwell looked over her tomatoes with a face like spoiled milk. "These'll do," he said, not looking at her. 50 cents for the lot. They were worth $1, easy. Eden knew it. He knew it. But she nodded and took the coins he dropped into her palm without touching her hand. She was loading her second basket when she heard the commotion. 2 white men had Caleb Jennings backed against the store's front wall. Caleb was young, maybe 20, full of the kind of confidence that got freedmen killed. He worked odd jobs around town, chopped wood, hauled freight, and didn't lower his eyes fast enough when white folks passed. "You got something to say, boy?" One of the men, thick-necked, with a beard stained yellow from tobacco, had his hand on Caleb's shirt. "No, sir." Caleb's voice stayed steady, but Eden saw fear in the set of his shoulders. "Sounded like you was talking back to Mr. Patterson here. I just said the work was done, sir. That's all." The second man, older and meaner, spat on the ground near Caleb's feet. "Uppity in... Those tomatoes ready or not?" Eden's voice cut through the moment like a blade. All 3 men turned. Eden stood in the street, her empty basket on her hip, looking directly at the 2 white men. She shouldn't have. Every freed person in Millstone knew you didn't interrupt white folks' business, but something in her refused to watch Caleb take what was coming. "This ain't your concern," Thickneck said. "Caleb helps me with my wagon sometimes," Eden said, her voice calm and clear. "Can't help me if he's too broken to lift." The lie hung in the air. Everyone knew it was a lie, but it gave the men something, a reason to walk away without losing face. They stared at her for a long moment. Eden didn't look down. Finally, the older man laughed, a sound like gravel. "You got yourself a protector, boy. Better thank her proper." They walked off. Caleb sagged against the wall. "You shouldn't have done that," he whispered when Eden passed. But his eyes said thank you. The ride home felt longer than usual. Eden noticed details she'd missed before. Fresh hoofprints in the road, deep and recent. Men on horses, riding at night when honest folks slept. The prints led toward her property. The sun hung low and red when she unhitched Patience and put her in the small lean-to that served as a barn. Eden carried water, scattered feed, and stood for a moment with her hand on the mule's warm neck. That's when she saw them. 3 riders sat their horses at the property line, maybe 100 yards distant. They didn't move, just watched. Silhouettes against the darkening sky. One of them leaned sideways and spat, a long, dark stream of tobacco juice. The gesture felt deliberate, meant to be seen. Eden's heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't run, didn't hide. She stood there and looked back at them until the last light bled from the sky. Then they turned their horses and rode away, slow and easy, like men with all the time in the world. Eden walked to her cabin. The door's simple latch felt fragile under her fingers. Inside, she barred it with the plank Isaac had fitted years ago. She checked the shutters, drew them tight. The candle sat waiting on the windowsill, same as always. Eden held the match for a long moment, flame trembling in her hand. Then she blew it out and stood in the dark, listening to the wind turn cold outside her door. 3 days passed like held breath. Eden worked her field in the morning heat, pulling weeds that seemed to sprout overnight. The damaged fence section still sagged where she'd found it. Boards pulled loose, nails bent. Animals, she'd told herself. Deer, maybe. But deer didn't leave boot prints in the soft earth. She carried water from the well in wooden buckets, 2 at a time, her shoulders aching by midday. The cotton plants needed rain, but the sky stayed clear and pitiless. Everything felt brittle. The air. The silence between her and the few freed people she passed on the road to town. Even her own thoughts had sharp edges now. At night, she kept the candle unlit. Thursday evening came heavy and still. No wind moved through the pines. The usual chorus of crickets and tree frogs seemed muted, as if the world itself was listening. Eden ate a small supper of beans and cornbread, washed her plate, and sat at her table as the last daylight drained from the sky. Somewhere far off, a dog started barking. Frantic, continuous. Then it stopped mid-bark, cut off like a blown-out candle. Eden's hands stilled on the table. She listened, heard nothing. Not even the mockingbird that usually sang its evening rounds. The silence felt wrong, felt shaped around something she couldn't see. She rose and checked the door bar. Solid. She moved to the window and peered through a gap in the shutters. The field stretched dark under a fingernail moon. Nothing moved. Eden turned away. That's when she heard the horses, not the quick gallop of messengers or the steady clip-clop of farmers heading home. This was slower, deliberate. Multiple riders moving together with the patience of men who knew their quarry couldn't run. She pressed her eye back to the shutter gap. Torches. 5 of them, maybe 6, bobbing in the darkness like fallen stars. They came across her field. The riders spread wide, their horses trampling through her cotton rows. The torchlight caught on white fabric. Hoods, she realized. White hoods with eye holes cut crude and terrible. Her breath stopped. They reached her fence and didn't slow down. One rider leaned from his saddle and kicked at the rails. Wood splintered. The horse stepped through, followed by the others, hooves churning up the soil Eden had worked so carefully. One man dismounted. He carried something long and wooden. In the torchlight, she saw it was a cross, rough-hewn from pine, taller than a man. 2 others helped him plant it in her yard, driving it deep with a heavy post-hole driver. The sound of wood striking earth carried like drumbeats. Eden backed from the window. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack bone. They wouldn't. Not here. Not to her. Outside, someone laughed. The sound was muffled by cloth, but unmistakable. High and excited, like a boy playing a cruel game. The cross stood planted now, arms spread wide. One rider touched his torch to its base. Fire caught and climbed, eager, turning the white pine orange and gold. The flames threw wild shadows across Eden's cabin walls. She couldn't stay inside. If they burned the cross, they might burn her home next. Her mother's quilts were in here. Isaac's coat. Everything she owned in the world. Eden grabbed her shawl, threw it around her shoulders, and unbarred the door. The heat hit her first. The cross blazed like a beacon, flames reaching toward the uncaring stars. 6 men on horseback ringed her yard. Their hoods made them faceless, anonymous, more terrible for being unknown. "Please," Eden said, and hated the tremor in her voice. "Please, I haven't done anything." "You got uppity," one rider said. His voice was young, country accent, probably born within 5 miles of where she stood. "Got in where you weren't wanted." "I just—" "Shut your mouth." 2 men dismounted. They moved with casual certainty, men who'd done this before. Eden turned to run back inside, but one caught her arm. His grip was iron. The other grabbed her other side, and together they dragged her toward the burning cross. "We're going to remind you," the young-voiced one said. "Remind all of you what freedom really means." Eden struggled. She wasn't weak. Farm work had made her strong, but they were stronger. One twisted her arm behind her back until she cried out. The other ripped her shawl, fabric tearing with a sound like paper. Around her neck hung a small silver locket, the only thing of her mother's she'd kept. It held a curl of her mother's hair and a pressed flower from her wedding day with Isaac. One of the men saw it catch the firelight. He grabbed it. The chain bit into Eden's neck, then snapped. "Pretty thing," he said, and threw it into the flames. "No!" Eden lunged forward, but they held her fast. What happened next, she would later struggle to remember in sequence. Moments came in fragments, disconnected. The rough ground against her back, the smell of torch smoke and unwashed bodies, hands that grabbed and tore. The burning cross above her, its flames reflected in 6 pairs of eyes, visible through white hoods. She stopped fighting after the first minute, went somewhere else in her mind, the way she'd learned to do as a child when the overseer's whip fell. She fixed her eyes on the cross and watched it burn, watched the flames consume the wood, bright and hot and merciless. The locket was in there somewhere, melting, her mother's hair turning to ash. She didn't scream, wouldn't give them that. One of them wanted her to, kept demanding it. When she stayed silent, he struck her across the face. Her lips split. She tasted copper and still said nothing. Eventually, they finished. They mounted their horses and rode away slow, laughing about something, voices fading into the pine forest. The cross kept burning, though lower now, collapsing into itself as the support beam charred through. Eden lay in the dirt, trembling. Her dress was torn, her shawl a ruined strip of fabric. Blood trickled from her split lip and traced a thin line down her chin. The sky above began to lighten. Not sunrise yet, but the deep blue that came before it. That liminal hour when night conceded defeat, but day hadn't yet claimed victory. The cross fell. It broke apart in a shower of embers, pieces settling into the churned earth of her yard. Smoke curled upward, thin and gray. Somewhere distant, a rooster crowed, then another. The world waking up, indifferent. Eden's breath came slow and shuddering. Each inhale hurt. Each exhale carried away a piece of who she'd been when the sun set yesterday. She pulled the torn shawl around her shoulders with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, and she lay there in the dirt beside the dying embers, watching the smoke rise toward a sky that offered no answers. The first thing Eden became aware of was pain. It lived in every part of her. Her ribs, her face, the deep ache between her legs. She opened her eyes to daylight, filtering through her shutters, thin and gray. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and something else. Herbs, maybe. Something medicinal. A man sat beside her bed. White, middle-aged, wearing a plain dark coat and wire-rimmed spectacles. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, wrapping clean bandages around her left wrist where the skin had been scraped raw. "Don't try to sit up yet," he said quietly. Eden recognized him. Dr. Hiram Cole, the northern missionary who'd set up a small practice on the edge of town, treating anyone who could pay and many who couldn't. White folks called him a radical. Black folks called him decent, which meant the same thing in different words. "How did you—" Eden's voice came out cracked and thin. "Caleb found you this morning. He came to get me." Dr. Cole finished tying off the bandage and set her arm down gently. "You've been in and out of consciousness for several hours." She remembered none of that. The last clear memory was the smoke rising from the burned cross, the sky lightening toward dawn. Everything after was darkness. "Your wounds are significant, but not life-threatening," Dr. Cole continued. He spoke in the measured tone of someone delivering medical facts, keeping emotion separate from diagnosis. Bruised ribs, facial contusions, lacerations that required cleaning. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Internal injuries consistent with violent assault. Eden closed her eyes. I need to know who did this, Dr. Cole said. I can report it to the Freedmen's Bureau. There are legal channels. No. Mrs. Walker, no. Eden opened her eyes and looked at him directly. You can't tell anyone. Not the Bureau. Not the Marshal. No one. Dr. Cole's jaw tightened. Behind his spectacles, his eyes held a frustration she recognized, the helplessness of good men who wanted to fix things that couldn't be fixed with medicine or law. If you don't identify them, he said slowly, they'll do this again, to you or to someone else. If I do identify them, I'll be dead before the week's out. Eden's voice was flat, stating fact. You know that's true. He removed his spectacles and cleaned them with a handkerchief, a gesture that gave him time to compose himself. Yes, he admitted finally. I know. Then you'll keep this between us. Dr. Cole replaced his spectacles and gathered his medical supplies into a worn leather bag. At the door, he turned back. I'll check on you in a few days. If the wounds show signs of infection, or if you develop a fever, send Caleb for me immediately. After he left, Eden lay in the silence of her cabin and listened to the world outside. Birds singing, wind through the pines, everything normal, everything the same, as if last night had never happened. Caleb came that afternoon, hat in hand, his young face tight with barely contained rage. Miss Eden, you can't stay here. He paced her small cabin like a caged animal. My cousin's got a place in Philadelphia. He works at the docks, makes good money. You could go there. Start over. This is my land, Caleb. Land ain't worth dying for. It's all Isaac and I ever owned. Eden sat in her chair, movements careful, each one a negotiation with pain. I leave now. They win. They take everything. They already took. Caleb stopped himself, fists clenched. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. It's all right. It ain't all right. None of this is all right. He looked at her with eyes too old for his young face. But if you're staying, I'm staying too. You need anything, you send word. After Caleb left, Eden forced herself to stand, to walk, to begin the slow process of reclaiming her body and her home. The burned cross still lay in the yard. Blackened wood scattered like broken bones. She gathered the pieces one by one. Each trip from yard to the woods behind her cabin an exercise in endurance. She dug a hole and buried them deep. The next week passed in a haze of healing and routine. She worked her field in the early morning hours when the heat was bearable, though her injured body protested every movement. The cotton needed tending. Weeds still grew. Life continued whether she was ready for it or not. She flinched at sounds now. The windmill's creaking made her jump. Horses on the distant road sent her heart racing. At night, she barred the door and slept with a kitchen knife under her pillow, though she knew it would do little good if they came back. 3 weeks after the night of the cross, Eden realized she'd missed her monthly bleeding. She sat at her table and counted days in her head. Counted again. The arithmetic was undeniable, and with it came a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with morning sickness. A child, growing inside her, conceived in violence and terror. She wept then, finally, the tears she'd held back since that night. They came silently, tracking down her face as she pressed both hands to her still flat stomach. She didn't know what she felt. Horror, yes. But beneath that, something else. A fierce, protective instinct she couldn't name. This wasn't the child she'd dreamed of giving Isaac. Not the baby they'd planned for in whispered conversations before he left for the war. This was something else entirely. But it was life, and life was all she had left to protect. Eden began sewing. Small clothes cut from fabric scraps, tiny gowns with careful stitches. She worked by candlelight after her field work was done, each stitch a small act of defiance. They'd tried to break her, but she was still here. still breathing, still capable of creating something from nothing. The storm came on a Saturday night. Thunder rolled across the sky like artillery fire. Lightning turned the world white for heartbeat. Long moments before plunging it back into darkness. Rain hammered the cabin roof, finding every leak, every weakness in the old wood. Eden knelt beside her bed and pulled out Isaac's folded union coat. She held it against her chest, breathing in the faint scent of him that still lingered in the fabric. Gunpowder and pine pitch, and the peculiar smell of a man who'd lived outdoors for months. "If you're out there, Isaac," she whispered, her voice lost beneath the storm's fury. "Forgive me." Lightning flashed through the window. For one brilliant instant, the world outside was illuminated in stark white light. Eden saw everything: the field, the windmill, the spot behind her cabin where she'd buried the cross. The burned patch of earth was still visible, a dark scar in her yard where nothing would grow again. Then darkness returned, absolute and complete, leaving only the sound of rain and the thunder of her own beating heart. The rain had turned the road into a river of mud. Eden stood at her window, watching water pool in the low spots of her yard, when she saw him, a dark figure moving slowly up the path, limping badly, one hand pressed against his side. He wore a coat that might have been blue once, though now it was the color of old blood and dirt. She gripped the windowsill. Her breath caught. The figure came closer, and the failing light revealed his face, gaunt, scarred, one eye catching the dim glow of her candle in a way that wasn't quite right. But the shape of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way he carried himself despite the limp. "Isaac." The word came out as barely a whisper. Eden's legs moved before her mind caught up, carrying her to the door. She threw it open and stepped into the rain. He stopped 10 feet from her porch, swaying slightly. Up close, she could see the damage the years had done. His left hand was a twisted ruin, 3 fingers ending in scarred stumps. His right eye was pale, filmed over with the milky white of blindness. A jagged scar ran from his temple to his jaw, pulling the corner of his mouth into a permanent half-grimace. "Eden." His voice was rougher than she remembered, scraped raw by years of shouting orders or screaming in pain. "I'm home." She wanted to run to him, wanted to collapse into his arms and weep, but her body wouldn't move. She stood frozen on her porch, rain soaking through her dress, staring at this stranger who wore her husband's face. "They told me you were dead," she said. They were almost right. Isaac took a step forward, then another. Each movement looked like it cost him. "Confederate patrol caught me near Vicksburg in '65, put me in a barn with 30 other men, set fire to it." Eden's hand went to her mouth. Most didn't make it out. He reached the porch and leaned against the post, breathing hard. "I did. Barely. Spent a year wandering, working when I could, healing when I couldn't. Took me this long to make it home." She saw the truth of it in his face, the terrible journey written in every scar, every hollow in his cheeks, every gray hair that hadn't been there before. This wasn't the man who'd left for war. This was what came back. "Come inside," she said quietly. The cabin felt smaller with him in it. Eden watched him take in the space, the neatly swept floor, the herbs drying from the rafters, the small pile of fabric scraps in the corner. His good eye moved from object to object, cataloging changes, noting what was different. His gaze stopped on the basket beside her chair, the one filled with tiny clothes she'd been sewing. "What's this?" He picked up a small gown, holding it carefully in his ruined hand. Eden's throat tightened. This was the moment. The lie she'd prepared, or the truth she couldn't speak. She made her choice. "I'm pregnant," she said. Isaac's eyes snapped to her face. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak. Then, slowly, carefully, he set the gown back in the basket and crossed to her. He placed his good hand on her stomach, pressing gently against the slight swell there. "Mine?" he asked. "Yes." The word came out steady. She'd practiced it enough in the mirror. Something broke in his face. The hard mask cracked, and beneath it she saw the man she'd married, the one who'd promised her a life beyond slavery, beyond war, beyond all the violence that had shaped them both. "I'll provide for you," he said, his voice thick. "Both of you. The war's over, Eden. No one will hurt us again." She wanted to believe him, wanted to feel safe in the promise. But the words rang hollow in her ears, drowned out by memories of masked men and burning crosses. That evening, they moved around each other like strangers learning to dance. Eden cooked cornmeal mush, while Isaac washed himself at the basin, and she tried not to stare at the lattice of scars covering his back. They ate in near silence, the clink of spoons against bowls the only conversation. After dinner, Isaac walked outside despite the rain. Eden watched from the window as he stood in the yard, studying the ground. He stopped at the burned patch where the cross had been, kneeling to run his fingers through the blackened earth. When he came back inside, water dripped from his coat onto the floor. "What happened here?" He gestured toward the burned spot. "In the yard." Eden kept her eyes on the dishes she was washing. "A storm." "Storm doesn't burn earth like that. Lightning strike. Couple weeks back." She could feel him watching her, feel the weight of his attention, the soldier's instinct that knew when someone was lying. But after a moment, he just nodded and hung his coat by the door. "I'm tired," he said. "Been walking for days." They lay in bed together for the first time in 3 years. The mattress creaked beneath his weight. His breathing was rough, labored, the sound of damaged lungs working too hard. He smelled of rain and road dust and something metallic that might have been old blood. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. It sounded like cannon fire, like the war following them home. "Eden," Isaac whispered. His hand found hers in the darkness, the scarred one with its missing fingers. He laced what remained through her own fingers. "I missed you." She didn't answer, couldn't, just lay there with her eyes open, staring at the ceiling while rain hammered the roof and thunder shook the walls. His breathing gradually slowed, deepened, became the heavy rhythm of sleep. But Eden stayed awake, feeling the weight of his hand in hers, and the weight of the child in her belly, and the weight of all the truths she couldn't speak, pressing down on her chest until she thought she might suffocate. In the darkness, she counted heartbeats. His, hers, the tiny flutter that had started in her womb. 3 lives under one roof, built on one terrible lie. The thunder rolled on. The morning came gray and cold. Isaac rose before dawn, careful not to wake Eden. He stood at the window and watched the mist rise from the fields like smoke from a dying fire. His reflection in the glass showed a stranger, scarred, hollow-eyed, bent by years he couldn't get back. He dressed slowly, buttoning his shirt with the hand that still worked properly. The ruined one had learned to grip, at least, had learned to hold things even if it couldn't feel them anymore. He pulled on his boots and reached for the old Union coat, then stopped. After a long moment, he left it hanging on the peg and took Eden's shawl instead, wrapping it around his shoulders against the chill. The walk into Millstone took an hour. His leg didn't bend right anymore, hadn't since the barn fire. Each step was a negotiation between what his body wanted to do and what it actually could. But he'd walked farther on worse injuries. The body was just meat. You kept moving until it stopped working entirely. The town appeared through the morning fog like something half-remembered from a dream. Nothing had changed, and everything had changed. The same buildings lined the same dirt street, but new faces filled them now. Or perhaps not new. Perhaps these were the same faces that had always been there, just wearing different expressions, less afraid, more confident. The war had ended differently for them than it had for him. People stared as he passed, A woman pulling water from a well froze mid-pump, watching him with narrowed eyes. Two old men sitting outside the general store stopped talking. One of them spat tobacco juice near Isaac's feet. Not quite on them, but close enough to make the point. "That coat," one muttered. "You see that coat?" Isaac kept walking. Let them look. Let them wonder. A soldier learned early that silence was often the best weapon. The sawmill sat at the edge of town, a long wooden structure that screamed with the sound of blades cutting through pine. The smell of fresh sawdust hung thick in the air, mixing with the sharper scent of machine oil. Men moved between stacks of lumber like ants around a disturbed hill, purposeful, busy, eyes down. Isaac found the foreman near the main saw, a wiry man in his 50s, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from old leather. He wore suspenders over a gray shirt, and his boots were caked with sawdust and mud. "Need work," Isaac said. The foreman looked him up and down, taking in the limp, the scarred hand, the damaged eye. "You strong enough to pull your weight?" "I can work." "Name's Tully. Eldon Tully. I run this mill, and I run it proper. You do what you're told, you stay out of trouble, we won't have problems." He paused, studying Isaac's face. "You serve?" "Union Scout." Something flickered in Tully's eyes. Not quite hatred, but close. "War's over. Don't matter now which side a man wore. Long as he works honest." Isaac nodded. He recognized the tone. Recognized the careful way Tully shaped his words to sound reasonable, while meaning something else entirely. This was a man who'd learned to hide his poison. "Start you on the lumber stacks," Tully said. 4 cents a day. You show up on time, you might earn more. The work was brutal but simple. Isaac spent the day hauling cut boards from the saw to the drying racks, his damaged legs screaming with each trip. The other workers kept their distance, though he caught them watching when they thought he wasn't looking. Nobody spoke to him, except to bark orders. Around midday, a young black man approached during the lunch break. He carried 2 tin cups of water and offered one to Isaac. "Caleb Jennings," the young man said. "Saw you talking with Miss Eden the other day." Isaac took the water. "She mentioned you. She all right?" Caleb glanced around, lowering his voice. "After everything? She's managing." Isaac drank slowly, watching Caleb's face. "What happened wasn't storm damage, was it?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "No, sir. But she don't want nobody knowing. Says it'll just make things worse." Isaac handed back the empty cup. "Who rides out at night here?" "You don't want to know that." "I do." Caleb studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You just got home, Mr. Walker. Don't go looking for that kind of trouble." But Isaac had already found it. He saw it in the way certain men clustered together during breaks, saw it in the way they lowered their voices when he passed, saw it in the way Tully smiled when talking about keeping order in the county. The afternoon dragged on. Isaac's hands blistered, then bled, then went numb. The sawdust stuck to his sweat and turned his skin gray. But he kept working, kept watching, kept cataloging faces and voices and the small tells that marked men who did violence in the dark. Evening came with rain. Isaac was carrying his last load when he heard laughter from behind the main building. 2 white men stumbled out from an alley between the lumber stacks, clearly drunk. One carried a bottle. The other had his arms slung over his companion's shoulders. "Should have seen her face," one was saying. "The colored woman who thought she was a man's equal. Thought she could talk back to white folks. Crying like a baby once we showed her proper." They laughed together, the sound ugly and wet. Isaac stopped walking. The boards in his arms suddenly felt very light, very manageable, easy to swing like a club if needed. "Course, that's what they all do in the end. Cry and beg and—" The laughter died. One of the men had noticed Isaac standing in the shadows, 20 feet away, holding a stack of lumber and saying nothing. Just watching, just breathing. "The hell you looking at?" Isaac didn't answer, didn't move. His face showed nothing, Not anger, not fear, not recognition. Just the blank expression of a man who'd learned long ago how to become stone. "I asked you a question, boy." The word hung in the air between them. The rain fell. The sawmill's blade screamed in the distance. Isaac set down the lumber very carefully, very slowly. Then he turned and walked away. His limp more pronounced than usual, his breathing controlled. Behind him, one man muttered something about teaching lessons. The other shushed him. Their footsteps went in the opposite direction. Isaac walked home through the rain. The water soaked through his shirt and ran into his eyes, but he didn't wipe it away. He let it pour over him, let it wash away the sawdust, but not the memory of those voices, not the sound of that laughter. By the time he reached the cabin, it was fully dark. He stood outside for a long time, letting the rain fall, his hands hanging loose at his sides. Then he opened the door and stepped inside. Eden lay on the bed, asleep. One hand rested protectively over the small swell of her belly. Her face looked peaceful in the dim light, the worry lines smoothed away by dreams. She'd left the lamp burning low for him. Isaac stood in the doorway and watched her breathe, watched the rise and fall of her chest, watched the way her fingers curled against her stomach, guarding what grew there. He crossed to the table and very carefully, very quietly, reached for the lamp. His scarred hand trembled slightly as he turned the wick down. The flame guttered and died, leaving only darkness and the sound of rain on the roof, and two people breathing in the night. The porch boards creaked under Isaac's weight. He sat with his back against the cabin wall, his damaged leg stretched out straight, the bayonet across his lap catching moonlight like water. The blade was old, Confederate steel he'd taken off a dead officer near Chattanooga. The tip had broken off years ago, but the edge still held. He worked the whetstone along its length in long, steady strokes. Metal whispered against stone. The sound was almost peaceful. Almost. Inside, Eden slept, or tried to. He heard her shift on the bed, heard the boards protest beneath her weight. She'd grown heavier in recent weeks, the child inside her making its presence known. Dr. Cole said everything was progressing normally, though he'd looked at Isaac strangely when he said it, like he wanted to ask questions he knew better than to voice. Isaac set down the whetstone and tested the blade's edge with his thumb. Sharp enough for what needed doing. He stood slowly, favoring his good leg, and stepped off the porch. The moon hung fat and yellow over the pine trees, turning the world silver and black. No clouds, good visibility. The kind of night where a man could see another man coming from a long way off. The kind of night where careful men stayed inside. Isaac walked into the woods behind the cabin, moving quietly despite his limp. The bayonet hung from his belt, hidden beneath his coat. He knew these woods now, had spent the last week learning every path, every game trail, every place where the undergrowth grew thick enough to hide a man. Clay Turner lived 3 miles east, in a small house near the old Campbell property. He worked as a deputy, which meant he carried a gun, and the law's permission to use it, which meant he thought himself safe. Men who felt safe made mistakes. Isaac reached the edge of Turner's property just after midnight. A barn stood dark against the sky, its doors hanging open. A single horse stamped inside, nervous. It could smell him, smell the death he carried. He waited in the tree line for an hour, watching, listening, making sure Turner was alone. The house stayed dark. No movement in the windows, no sound but wind and the horse's restless shifting. Isaac crossed the yard like a shadow. The barn's interior smelled of hay and manure and old wood. The horse whinnied softly when he approached, backing into the corner of its stall. He spoke to it in the low, gentle voice he'd once used to calm Union mounts before dawn raids. "Easy now. Easy." The rope hung from a beam overhead, thick hemp, coiled and waiting. Turner used it to train horses, breaking them to saddle. Isaac took it down, and tested its strength. Good quality. Strong enough to hold a man's weight. He worked quickly, tying the noose with the same knots he'd learned in the army. The kind that tightened when pulled, the kind that didn't slip. Then he settled into the darkness and waited. Turner came to check on his horse just before dawn. He carried a lantern in one hand and walked with the loose confidence of a man who'd never been ambushed. The lantern light swung lazily, casting long shadows. Isaac moved behind him, silent, precise. The bayonet's broken tip pressed against Turner's spine, right between his ribs. "Don't move." Turner froze. The lantern trembled in his grip. "You rode out 2 months ago," Isaac said quietly. "Wore a hood. Burned a cross in a woman's yard." I don't know what." "Don't lie to me." The blade pressed harder. "I heard you laughing about it. Heard you bragging." Turner's breathing came fast and shallow. "Please, I got a wife. So did she." Isaac's scarred hand moved to the rope. He slipped the noose over Turner's head before the man could react, then kicked his legs out from under him. Turner fell hard, his lantern crashing to the barn floor. Oil spread across the straw, but didn't catch. The rope tightened. Turner clawed at his throat, his boots scrabbling for purchase on nothing. His face turned purple in the dim light. His eyes bulged. Isaac watched until the struggling stopped, until the deputy hung still and silent, swaying slightly in the darkness. Then he picked up the fallen lantern, blew it out, and walked back into the woods. The second man died 3 nights later. Wes Harlan worked at the general store, selling flour and fabric to townsfolk who smiled at him while he short-changed their purchases. He lived alone in a shack near Miller's Creek, where the water ran slow and deep. Isaac found him walking home drunk, stumbling along the creek path with a bottle in his hand. The man was singing, some old Confederate song about glory and Southern soil. His voice echoed off the water. When Harlan stopped to piss in the creek, Isaac stepped from the trees and put a hand over his mouth. The other hand held the bayonet. "You remember Eden Walker?" Harlan's eyes went wide with recognition and fear. "I thought so." The creek accepted Harlan's body with barely a splash. Isaac held him under until the bubbles stopped, then used the bayonet to tangle the hood. Yes, the man had been carrying it in his coat pocket, around his face. Let whoever found him understand the message. He walked home as dawn broke over the hills, his boots wet with creek water, his hands steady. Eden was awake when he returned. She stood at the stove, making coffee, her belly pressing against her nightdress. She didn't look at him when he entered, just poured 2 cups and set one on the table. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep." "Neither could I." They sat in silence, drinking coffee as sunlight crept through the window. Eden's hands trembled slightly around her cup. Isaac noticed, but said nothing. His own hands were perfectly still. That evening, Eden noticed the second cup was already dirty when she went to wash dishes, already used before dawn. She looked at the peg where Isaac's coat hung, saw how the hem was wet and muddy. She said nothing, just scrubbed the cup harder. That night, she prayed longer than usual, knelt beside the bed with her hands clasped and her eyes closed, whispering words she hoped God still heard. Prayed for forgiveness, prayed for strength, prayed for the child growing inside her, prayed that whatever Isaac was doing would end before it consumed them both. But the next morning, when she stepped outside to fetch water, she saw the cross. It burned in their field, 30 yards from the cabin. A crude wooden thing planted deep in the earth, wrapped in oil-soaked rags that sent black smoke into the pale morning sky. And hanging from the crossbeam, his neck twisted at an impossible angle, was Clay Turner's corpse. Eden dropped her water bucket. The sound echoed across the field. Isaac stood beside her. She hadn't heard him approach. He stared at the burning cross, his face completely still. No surprise, no horror, no emotion at all. just the blank expression of a man looking at his own work. The firelight flickered across his features, turning his scars into shadows, his pale eye into something that caught the flames and held them. He didn't blink, didn't move, just watched the cross burn with the same empty patience he'd shown when sharpening his bayonet. Eden's hands went to her belly. The child kicked once, hard, as if sensing her fear. The cross burned, the smoke rose, and Isaac Walker stood silent as stone, watching justice, or something like it, announce itself to Millstone in the language the town understood best. The church bell rang clear and sharp across Millstone that Sunday morning, calling the faithful to worship. Eden Walker smoothed her best dress, the blue cotton one she'd worn the day Isaac left for war, and adjusted the shawl that hid the growing curve of her belly. 7 months now. The child moved constantly, pressing against her ribs like it wanted out. Isaac stood beside her in his clean shirt, the one without patches. He'd shaved that morning, scraping away the week's stubble with his old straight razor. The scars on his face showed more clearly now. The mangled fingers of his left hand were hidden in his coat pocket. They walked to church slowly. Eden needed to stop twice to catch her breath, leaning against fence posts while the world steadied around her. Isaac waited without speaking, his good hand hovering near her elbow but not touching. Not since he'd learned the truth about the child. Not since the bodies started appearing. The First Baptist Church of Millstone stood white and proud at the town's center, its steeple pointing toward heaven like an accusing finger. White families filled the front pews. Black families, those brave or foolish enough to attend, sat in the back 3 rows, separated by an invisible line no one questioned. Eden and Isaac took their seats in the last pew. The wood was harder here, less polished, worn smooth by the weight of people who knew their place. Around them, other freed people nodded quiet greetings. Old Mama Frances, who'd outlived 3 husbands and slavery both. The Jennings family, Caleb among them, his eye still swollen from where someone had struck him outside the mill. A young couple whose names Eden didn't know, holding a baby that never cried. Everyone had learned not to make noise in white spaces. The church filled slowly. Merchants and farmers and their wives, dressed in Sunday best, exchanging pleasantries about weather and crops. Their voices carried easily, filling the room with comfortable conversation. No one looked toward the back pews. It was easier that way. Easier to pretend the black folks were furniture, part of the building itself. Then Reverend Jeremiah Paulson entered from the vestry. He was a tall man, silver-haired, and handsome in the way that made women forgive too much. His black robes swept behind him as he climbed to the pulpit. His smile was warm and welcoming, his hands spread wide like he wanted to embrace the whole congregation. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice rich and deep, "welcome to the house of the Lord." The congregation murmured their amens. Eden watched Isaac from the corner of her eye. His jaw was tight, his pale eye fixed on Paulson like a hawk watching a rabbit. "Today," Paulson continued, "I want to speak to you about order, about the divine structure that holds our world together." He paused, letting his words settle. "The Bible tells us that everything has its place. The shepherd tends the flock. The father leads the family. The master guides the servant." Eden felt the words like slaps. Around her, other black faces went carefully blank. The kind of blankness that meant survival. The kind that hid rage so deep it became part of your bones. "But what happens," Paulson's voice rose slightly, "when that order is disrupted? When the servant rebels? When the child disobeys? When the natural hierarchy is overturned?" His hands gripped the pulpit edge. Eden saw his knuckles go white. "Divine punishment," he said. "Swift and terrible. God does not tolerate disorder. He does not forgive those who rise above their station." The sermon went on. 20 minutes of coded hate dressed in scripture. 20 minutes of threats wrapped in theology. Paulson's voice trembled now, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Eden realized he was afraid. The deputy's death had shaken the town. Wes Harlan's body, pulled from the creek, had terrified it. White men who'd walked confidently through Millstone now jumped at shadows. They gathered in tight groups, speaking in whispers. They rode home before dark. They knew something was hunting them. Paulson finished his sermon with a prayer for protection, for deliverance from evil, for God's mercy on those who walked in darkness. His eyes swept the congregation as he prayed. When they passed over the back pews, they caught on Isaac, held there. Recognition flashed, not of the man, but of what he represented. The ghost they'd created, the soldier who wouldn't die. Isaac stared back, unblinking. The prayer ended. The congregation rose for the final hymn, voices lifted in uncertain harmony, singing about grace and salvation while outside the windows, Millstone held its breath. Eden and Isaac left before the service ended, slipping out while everyone stood. No one stopped them. No one even looked. They walked home in silence. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning coolness. Insects buzzed in the roadside grass. A dog barked somewhere distant. "He knows," Eden said finally. "Yes. What are you going to do?" Isaac didn't answer, just kept walking, his limp more pronounced than usual. Tired. Or thinking. Eden couldn't tell any more. That night, after supper, Isaac sharpened his bayonet again. The whetstone sang its familiar song, metal on stone, over and over. Eden sat by the window, mending a tear in his spare shirt. The child kicked. She pressed her hand against it, feeling the small life move inside her. "Isaac," she said softly. He looked up. "Please, whatever you're planning, don't." He tested the blade's edge. "I have to finish it. You don't. We could leave, go north, start over, and let them win? They've already won. They've always won. We just survive around the edges." Isaac set down the whetstone. His scarred face was unreadable in the lamplight. "I survived worse than them. I survived prison camps where men ate rats and died screaming. I survived being buried alive when a trench collapsed. I survived all of it so I could come home to you." His voice cracked, just slightly, just enough. "And when I got here, you were broken. Our child—" He stopped, took a breath. "This child was made in violence. Everything we built was torn down because they wanted to remind us we're not human. So you'll prove them right?" Eden's hands trembled over the mending. "You'll become the monster they say you are?" "I'm already a monster." The war made sure of that. Isaac stood, sliding the bayonet into his belt. "The only question is, whose monster I am." He put on his coat. Eden watched him move toward the door. "Where are you going?" "To church," he said. "To pray." The door closed behind him. Eden sat alone in the lamplight, her hands on her belly, and waited for the world to burn. Isaac reached Paulson's house just after midnight. It sat on the edge of town, a modest white structure with a well-tended garden and a small stable. A light burned in the front window. The Reverend was awake. Isaac knocked. 3 times, slow and deliberate. The door opened. Paulson stood in his nightshirt, a lamp in one hand. His eyes widened when he saw Isaac's face. "Mr. Walker, it's rather late for— Do you believe in redemption?" Isaac asked quietly. Paulson's throat worked. "What?" "Redemption, salvation, all the things you preach about." Isaac stepped closer. "Do you believe God forgives everyone? For some sins? Yes. For others." Paulson trailed off. "For others? Some actions place a man beyond grace." Isaac nodded slowly. "Like burning a cross in a woman's yard? Like violating her in God's name?" The color drained from Paulson's face. "I don't know what you're—" "Yes, you do." Isaac's hand moved to his belt, to the bayonet. "You led them, gave the orders, blessed the masks." Paulson backed into his house. Isaac followed. The lamp flame guttered in the sudden movement, casting wild shadows. "The war is over," Paulson whispered. "We were trying to restore order. To save what? Your pride? Your power?" Isaac's voice stayed level, calm, the way it had been when he'd interrogated Confederate prisoners. "You stood in that pulpit this morning and threatened divine punishment. So here I am. Divine enough for you?" Paulson's back hit the wall. "Please, I have money. You have nothing I want." Isaac left 10 minutes later. He locked the door behind him, pocketing the key. Paulson's screams had already stopped. The man had died quickly, quicker than he deserved. The bayonet was clean when Isaac returned it to his belt. He walked to the church. The building stood dark and empty, its white walls gleaming in the moonlight. Beautiful, pure, built on foundations of hate. Isaac had brought lamp oil, 3 bottles, carried in a sack. He poured them carefully, around the pulpit, over the pews, across the vestry floor where Paulson kept his robes. The smell filled the air, thick and chemical and full of promise. The match caught easily. Flame spread like judgment, like the fires of hell Paulson had preached about so often. It climbed the walls and consumed the pews and turned the steeple into a torch that lit the night sky. Isaac stood in the churchyard and watched it burn. The heat warmed his scarred face. The light turned his pale eye amber. Somewhere behind him, the church bell began to ring. Not from human hands, just the heat making the metal expand and contract, making it sing its own death song. The sound carried across Millstone. Windows lit in houses throughout town. People emerged onto porches, pointing at the flames, shouting, running toward the church with buckets. They were too late. The building was already gone. Eden woke to smoke drifting through their bedroom window. She sat up carefully, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. The smell was unmistakable. Burning wood, burning fabric, burning history. She moved to the window. In the distance, orange light painted the sky. The church. She knew it without being told. The door opened behind her. Isaac entered quietly, smelling of smoke and oil. He removed his coat, hung it on the peg, started unlacing his boots. Eden turned to face him. "It's you," she whispered. "Isn't it?" He didn't deny it, didn't look away, just met her eyes with that terrible calm he'd brought back from the war. "They lit the first fire," he replied. "I'm just finishing what they started." 2 days after the church burned, Millstone held its breath. White families packed wagons in the middle of the night. They left quietly, without goodbyes, heading north or west, or anywhere that wasn't here. The ones who remained locked their doors and kept their lamps burning. They gathered in tight clusters outside the general store, voices low and fearful. The clan had disbanded. No more midnight rides, no more crosses burning in fields, but the fear remained, stronger now, more focused, because they knew someone was still hunting. In the black quarters of town, people spoke in whispers. They prayed harder, longer. Their voices lifted in hymns that floated through open windows and filled the humid air with something close to hope. Eden heard them from her cabin. She sat by the window, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, feeling the child move restlessly inside her. The contractions had started that morning, small ones at first, barely noticeable. Now they came harder, closer together. She breathed through them, counted seconds between each one, tried to stay calm. Isaac stood in the doorway, watching her. His coat was already on, the bayonet at his belt. His face showed no emotion, but his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "Don't go," Eden said quietly. "Not tonight. I have to finish it. The baby's coming. I need you here. I'll be back before dawn." Another contraction hit. Eden gasped, gripping the windowsill. Pain rolled through her abdomen like a wave, sharp and deep. When it passed, she looked up at Isaac with tears in her eyes. "Please," she whispered. "Please, stay." He crossed the room, knelt beside her chair, took her hand in his scarred one. His touch was gentle, almost tender. "One more name," he said. "Just one. Then it's done. And if you don't come back, I always come back." He kissed her forehead, rose, walked to the door without looking back. Eden watched him disappear into the darkness. Then another contraction came, stronger this time, and she could only focus on breathing, on surviving, on bringing this child into a world that had tried so hard to destroy it. Sheriff Amos Boyd sat alone in the jailhouse, a bottle of whiskey on his desk. The building was empty. His deputies had fled 2 days ago, claiming family emergencies or sudden illnesses. Cowards, all of them. Boyd had stayed because this was his town, his territory. He'd fought for it during the war and kept control of it after. He wouldn't be chased out by some ghost. But his hand shook as he poured another drink. The door opened. No knock, no warning. Just the creak of hinges and a rush of cool night air. Isaac Walker stepped inside. Boyd's hand moved toward the revolver on his desk, the same gun he'd used to terrorize freed people, to enforce his version of order. But Isaac was faster. His bayonet appeared in his hand like magic, the blade reflecting lamplight. "Don't," Isaac said quietly. Boyd froze. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the coolness. "You're making a mistake, boy. I'm not your boy. You think killing me changes anything? There's others. Always others." Isaac moved closer. Silent as smoke, his pale eye caught the lamplight and seemed to glow. "Tell me what happened that night." "What night?" "You know which one." Boyd's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Isaac's hand shot out, grabbed Boyd's wrist, slammed it down on the desk. The bayonet's point pressed against the sheriff's palm, not breaking skin, but promising to. "Tell me," Isaac repeated. His voice stayed level, calm, more terrifying than any scream. "Every detail, every moment, everything you did to my wife." Boyd's face went pale. "It wasn't, we were just, she needed to be reminded." "Of what?" "Of her place, of what she is." The words tumbled out now, desperate and ugly. "You people got too comfortable after the war. Started thinking you were equal. Someone had to restore order. So you violated her." "We sent a message." Isaac's hand pressed down. The blade bit into Boyd's palm. Blood welled around the steel. Boyd screamed. "Who else?" Isaac asked. "Names. All of them." Boyd gasped them out between sobs. Clay Turner, Wes Harlan, Reverend Paulson, Eldon Tully, 3 others, all dead now, found in various states of terror throughout the week. "And you led them," Isaac said. Yes, I led them." "Why?" "Because I could." Boyd's voice cracked. "Because the war was over and we lost everything, and she was there, and she thought she was better than us, and—" Isaac pulled the bayonet free. Blood dripped onto the desk, pooling around scattered papers and the whiskey bottle. Boyd clutched his wounded hand, whimpering. "You're right about one thing," Isaac said. He reached for Boyd's revolver, checked the chambers. 6 bullets. "The war took everything from you." He pressed the gun to Boyd's forehead. "But it gave me this." The shot echoed through the empty jailhouse, through the empty streets, across Millstone like thunder rolling down from distant hills. Eden screamed as another contraction tore through her. Dr. Cole knelt beside the bed, his hands steady despite the circumstance. Caleb stood near the door, pale and uncertain, holding clean towels and boiling water like he'd been instructed. "You're doing well," Dr. Cole said. His voice was calm, practiced. "The baby's coming fast, too fast, but that's all right. We're ready." Eden gripped the bedsheets. Her whole body felt like it was splitting apart. The pain was enormous, bigger than fear, bigger than shame, bigger than everything that had happened. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't do this." "Yes, you can. Where's Isaac?" Dr. Cole didn't answer, just focused on his work, murmuring instructions she barely heard through the roaring in her ears. Outside, thunder rumbled. Real thunder this time, not gunfire. A storm rolling in from the west, bringing rain and wind and the smell of wet earth. Eden cried out again, pushed when Dr. Cole told her to push, breathed when he told her to breathe. The world narrowed to just this moment, this pain, this impossible task of bringing life into darkness. "Almost there," Dr. Cole said. "Once more. Just once more." She pushed with everything she had left, with all the strength she'd used to survive slavery, to build a farm, to endure violation and grief and fear. She pushed with rage and hope and love all tangled together. And then a cry, small and fierce and utterly alive. "It's a boy," Dr. Cole said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have a son." He placed the baby on Eden's chest, tiny and red and perfect. The child's hands curled into fists. His eyes were shut tight against the lamplight. He screamed like he was angry at the world for existing. Eden wrapped her arms around him. Tears streamed down her face, not from pain now, but from something else entirely, something that felt almost like joy. The door opened. Isaac stepped inside, dawn light behind him. His hands were still stained red. His coat smelled of gunpowder and rain. He saw the baby, stopped in the doorway. His scarred face went very still. Dr. Cole stood, wiping his hands on a towel. "It's a boy," he said quietly. Isaac crossed the room slowly, knelt beside the bed. His trembling hands reached out, hesitated, then gently touched the baby's tiny head. The child stopped crying, opened his eyes, stared up at this stranger with dark, ancient awareness. "Then the war's over," Isaac whispered. Days passed like ghosts. The rain had stopped. The fields dried slowly, mud turning to dust under a pale sun that seemed afraid to shine too bright. Birds returned to the trees around Eden's cabin. Wildflowers pushed up through the burned patch of earth where the cross had stood. But peace didn't come with them. Millstone had changed. The white folks who remained moved quickly through the streets, eyes down, speaking in hushed tones. The general store closed early. The saloon stayed dark. Families packed wagons and left without saying where they were going. The Klan had collapsed. Everyone knew it. Their leaders were dead, their meeting places abandoned, their white hoods found discarded in ditches and behind barns like shed skins from poisonous snakes. But no one spoke the truth out loud. No one said the names of the dead men. No one mentioned what had really happened. Instead, they whispered about a ghost. A soldier who walked the pine forests at night. A shadow that appeared when crosses burned. A specter from the war that refused to rest. The black families of Millstone whispered too, but their voices carried different weight. Hope lived in their words. They walked with straighter backs now. Their children played in yards without fear. They sang louder in their churches, praising a God who had finally sent deliverance. Eden heard it all from her cabin. She sat by the window nursing her baby, listening to hymns drift across the fields. The child was small but healthy. His eyes had opened fully now, dark and clear, watching everything with an intensity that made her heart ache. She had named him Samuel, after her father, sold away when she was 6, after the prophet who heard God's voice in the darkness. The baby fed greedily, his tiny hands gripping her finger with surprising strength. She hummed to him, old songs her mother had sung during slavery, gentle melodies that had survived whips and chains and everything that tried to destroy beauty. Outside, Isaac worked on the fence. He had been repairing it for 3 days now. The same section, over and over, pulling up posts, resetting them, measuring angles that didn't need measuring. His movements were precise, but meaningless, like a man trying to stay busy so he wouldn't have to think. Eden watched him through the window, watched the way he moved. Slower now, heavier, like he was carrying weight no one else could see. His scarred hands gripped the tools too tight. His jaw stayed clenched. He barely spoke anymore, answering her questions with single words or just silence. At night, he didn't sleep. She felt him leave the bed, heard his boots on the porch, saw his shadow against the moonlight as he sat outside for hours. Sometimes she heard him talking, low murmurs she couldn't understand, conversations with ghosts, with memories, with the men he'd killed. She knew what he'd done. Not the details, but the truth of it. She'd known since the night Reverend Paulson's church burned, maybe even before that. And she'd said nothing, because part of her, a dark, secret part she didn't want to acknowledge, had been glad. But that gladness was turning to ash now, sour and cold in her mouth. The baby finished feeding. Eden lifted him to her shoulder, patting his back gently until he burped. He made a small sound of contentment and settled against her neck, his breath warm and steady. This was what mattered, this tiny life, this chance to build something good from all the horror. But Isaac was slipping away from it, from her, from everything that might heal him. She couldn't let him disappear into darkness. Not again. Eden stood carefully, cradling Samuel against her chest. She walked to the old wooden trunk in the corner, where they kept blankets and winter clothes, set the baby down gently in his basket by the fire, making sure he was warm and comfortable. Then she knelt beside the trunk, moved the blankets aside, found the loose board in the floor beneath it. Her hands shook as she pried it up. The smell hit her first, smoke and blood and something else, something rotten. Death, she realized, the smell of death. Inside the hidden space lay coiled ropes stained dark brown, white cloth hoods, some torn, all marked with ash and mud. A leather journal with names written in careful script, each one crossed out with heavy black lines. Clay Turner, Wes Harlan, Reverend Paulson, Eldon Tully, Sheriff Amos Boyd. Others she didn't recognize. 7 names total. 7 scratched-out lives. Eden's stomach turned. She lifted one of the hoods, felt its rough texture, saw the eye holes cut raggedly into the fabric. This one had blood on it, fresh enough that it still felt slightly damp. She dropped it, like it burned her. The journal fell open. Isaac's handwriting filled the pages. Not just names, but details, locations, schedules, weaknesses, everything a soldier would need to plan an attack. The entries were clinical, emotionless, like he was mapping enemy territory instead of stalking neighbors. The final page showed a single word written in large letters, finished. But there was a question mark after it. Eden closed the journal slowly, put everything back into the hole, replaced the board, covered it with blankets. Then she sat there on the floor, breathing hard, feeling tears burn behind her eyes. Outside, hammering stopped. Footsteps approached. The door opened. Isaac stepped inside, covered in dust and sweat. He saw her sitting by the trunk, saw her face. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition. Acceptance. "You found it," he said. Not a question. Eden stood. "How many more?" "What? How many more people are you planning to kill?" Isaac was quiet. He moved past her, going to the basin to wash his hands. The water turned gray with dirt and something darker. "It's done." "Is it?" "Yes." "Then why can't you sleep? Why do you sit outside every night like you're waiting for something?" He dried his hands slowly. "Old habits. Don't lie to me, Isaac." Her voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. Samuel stirred in his basket but didn't wake. Not now. Not after everything. Isaac turned to face her. His scarred face showed nothing. Empty. Hollow. like all the life had been burned out of him during the war, and these weeks of killing had finished the job. "What do you want me to say?" he asked. "I want you to tell me you're done, that you won't keep doing this. I told you. It's finished." "But is it?" Eden stepped closer. "Because that journal has a question mark. Like you're not sure. Like maybe there's more." "There's always more." His voice stayed flat. "More men who think like them. More hatred. More violence. Killing 7 won't change that." "Then why did you do it?" "Because they hurt you." The words hung between them. Simple. Terrible. True. Eden felt her throat tighten. "And what about the baby? What about Samuel? What kind of father can you be if you're consumed by this? The kind who keeps him safe. You can't build peace out of graves, Isaac. You can't create something good from so much death." He stared at her for a long moment. Then something changed in his face, a crack in the emptiness. Pain leaked through, raw and sharp. "Then peace was never meant for us," he said quietly. The words hit her like a blow. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Isaac's voice finally showed emotion. Bitter. Exhausted. "We were born into violence. Raised in it. The war gave us a taste of freedom, and then took it back. They violated you because we dared to hope. So I gave them what they gave us. Death. Fear. Justice they couldn't escape. That's not justice. That's revenge. What's the difference? Justice heals. Revenge just creates more pain." Isaac shook his head. "Tell that to the men who burned crosses in our yard. To the ones who—" He stopped. Couldn't say it. His hands clenched into fists. "They started this. I finished it." Eden moved closer, put her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beat hard and fast beneath her palm. "And now, it's done. You said so yourself. So let it end here. Let us try to build something. Please." He looked down at her hand, at the determination in her face. "And if I can't," he asked, "then I'll turn you in." The words came out before she could stop them. Cold. Final. Isaac went very still. "What?" "If you kill again, if you become what they were, I'll go to the federal marshals myself. I'll tell them everything." "You'd do that? To save you from yourself?" "Yes." They stared at each other. The fire crackled. Samuel made small sleeping sounds. Outside, wind moved through the pines. Finally, Isaac spoke. His voice was barely a whisper. "Then you'll have to live without me twice." He turned, walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. "I love you, Eden, but I can't be what you need me to be. The war took that from me. What they did to you finished it." He looked back at her. "I'm sorry." Then he stepped outside into the gathering darkness. Night fell heavy and complete. Isaac sat on the porch, stars appearing one by one overhead. Cool air drifted down from the hills. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Inside, the baby cried softly. He heard Eden's voice, gentle and soothing, singing the child back to sleep. His bayonet lay across his knees. The blade caught starlight, throwing faint reflections across the worn wood. He'd cleaned it after Boyd, sharpened it, made it ready. For what? He didn't know anymore. Isaac lifted the weapon, studied his reflection in the steel. Distorted, ghostly, barely recognizable. Was this who he'd become? A blade in the darkness? A tool designed only to cut? The baby's crying stopped. Eden's singing continued, soft and pure. Isaac set the bayonet down on the porch beside him. Didn't sheathe it, didn't put it away, just laid it there like an offering, or a surrender. He sat under the stars, listening to his wife sing their child to sleep, and wondered if peace was something a man could find after he'd walked so long in blood. The bayonet gleamed in the starlight, waiting. The dust rose in lazy clouds as 2 horses came down the road. Eden saw them from the porch where she sat mending one of Samuel's shirts. Her hands stilled, her breath caught. Federal marshals. She stood slowly, setting the sewing aside, called into the house. "Isaac!" He appeared in the doorway, holding Samuel against his shoulder. The baby was nearly 3 months old now, already filling out, his eyes bright and curious. Isaac saw the riders and his jaw tightened. "Stay inside," he said quietly. "No." Eden took Samuel from him. "We face this together." The marshals reined up at the gate. 2 men, one white, older, with silver hair and a weathered face, the other black, younger, wearing his uniform with careful pride. The silver badge on his chest caught the afternoon sun. The black marshal dismounted first. He was tall, lean, his movements precise. Military bearing. As he came closer, Eden saw recognition flash across Isaac's face. "Sergeant Reese," Isaac said. The marshal stopped. A slow smile spread across his face. "Captain Walker. Been a long time." They stood looking at each other for a moment. Then Reese extended his hand. Isaac shook it firmly. "Heard you were dead," Reese said. "Was. Got better." Reese's smile faded. He glanced at his partner, still mounted. "Deputy Marshal Hawkins, this is Isaac Walker. We served together in Tennessee." Hawkins nodded curtly. "We need to ask some questions about recent events in Millstone." Eden's arms tightened around Samuel. The baby made a small sound of protest. Reese's eyes moved to her, to the child. Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe, or compassion. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Daniel Reese, Federal Marshal. We're investigating several deaths that occurred over the past few weeks." "I heard about that," Isaac said evenly. "Clan business, they say." "That's one theory." Reese's voice stayed neutral. "Others think it might be something else." Hawkins dismounted, his hand resting casually on his pistol. 7 men dead in 6 weeks. All former Confederates. All connected to the local Klan chapter. "That's a lot of coincidence." "Dangerous times," Isaac said. "Dangerous men making dangerous enemies. Among themselves? Seems likely." Hawkins's eyes narrowed. "Or maybe someone came back from the dead with a score to settle." The air went tight. Eden felt her heart hammering. Samuel began to fuss, sensing the tension. She bounced him gently, trying to soothe him. Reese raised a hand. "Deputy, why don't you water the horses? I'll handle the questioning." Hawkins looked like he wanted to argue. Then he shrugged. "Your investigation, Sergeant." He led the horses toward the trough by the barn. When he was out of earshot, Reese turned back to Isaac. His voice dropped low. "We need to talk, honestly." Isaac glanced at Eden. She nodded slightly. They moved to the porch, sitting on the steps. Reese remained standing, hands clasped behind his back, like he was still in formation. 7 dead, Reese said quietly. Turner, Harlan, Paulson, Tully, Boyd, and 2 others. All killed in ways that suggest military training. Precise, efficient. No wasted effort. Isaac said nothing. Found rope work that matches Union Scout training. Found tracks that suggest someone who knows how to move through woods without leaving much trace. Found witnesses who saw a man in a faded blue coat near 2 of the scenes. Still, Isaac stayed silent. Reese sighed. "I've been reading reports. Talking to people. Freed people, mostly. They won't talk to Hawkins, but they talk to me. They tell me about a woman who was violated. About a cross burned in her yard. About a husband everyone thought was dead." Eden's breath shook. Samuel whimpered. She pulled him closer. "They also tell me," Reese continued, "that the Klan disbanded. That white families who used to terrorize freed people packed up and left. That for the first time since the war ended, black folks in this county can walk without fear." He paused. "Funny how that happened right after those 7 men died." Isaac finally spoke. "What are you saying, Sergeant?" "I'm saying I understand." Reese's voice was rough with emotion. "I'm saying I spent 3 years fighting for freedom, and when I came home, I found my sister hanging from a tree because she smiled at the wrong white man. I'm saying I know what it means to want justice when the law won't give it. Eden felt tears burn her eyes. But I'm also saying, Reese went on, that I wear this badge now, that I swore an oath, that I have to write a report. Then write it, Isaac said flatly. Reese looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, handed it to Isaac. Isaac unfolded it, read slowly. His eyebrows rose. Internal feuds among former Confederate operatives, he read aloud, likely caused by disputes over money and territory. Several suspects identified, all deceased. Case closed, pending further evidence. He looked up at Reese. You wrote this already? Before I came here. Reese's voice was steady. I knew what I'd find. Or rather, what I wouldn't find. Because whoever did this, if anyone did, they're done now, aren't they? Isaac held his gaze. Yes. Good. Reese took the paper back, refolded it carefully. Then there's nothing more to investigate. Just old hatreds burning themselves out. Hawkins called from the barn. Sergeant! Horses are ready! Reese straightened. For a moment he stood there, looking at Isaac and Eden and the baby. Then, slowly, deliberately, he brought his hand up in a crisp military salute. Isaac stood, returned it just as crisply. Take care of your family, Captain, Reese said quietly. You too, Sergeant. Reese turned, walked back to his horse, mounted smoothly. Hawkins was already riding back toward the road, clearly eager to leave. Before following, Reese looked back one last time. The war's over now. For real this time. Make sure it stays that way. Then he wheeled his horse and rode after his partner. Eden and Isaac stood together on the porch, watching until the dust settled and the marshals disappeared down the road. Samuel cooed softly, reaching up to grab at Eden's chin. It's over, she whispered. Isaac nodded slowly. It's over. That evening, as the sun dropped low and painted the sky orange and gold, Isaac went to the old trunk, pulled out his Union coat. The fabric was worn thin in places, the buttons tarnished, the sleeves frayed. It smelled of old smoke and older memories. Eden joined him in the back field, carrying a shovel. They said nothing as Isaac dug a hole beneath the oak tree, where the soil was soft and dark. Said nothing as he laid the coat carefully in the earth, smoothing the fabric one last time. Eden knelt beside him. Together they pushed the soil back, covering the blue cloth until no trace remained. Isaac tamped the earth down firmly. Eden stood, brushing dirt from her hands. The wind moved through the grass, carrying the scent of coming rain. They held hands as the first drops began to fall. Years passed. The farm grew. The field bloomed each spring with wildflowers, purple and white and gold, covering the earth like a blanket. Samuel grew strong and tall, helping his father work the land. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon was full, travelers on the road would see a figure in white walking through that field. A woman carrying a lantern, her dress moving gently in the breeze. Some said she guarded the land. Others said she waited for something. Those who remembered the old stories whispered softly, "She waits for her soldier." But the truth was simpler. Eden walked the field where the coat lay buried, and she remembered. Remembered the boy who went to war believing in freedom. Remembered the man who came back broken. Remembered the soldier who chose love over vengeance, finally, in the end. And under the soil where the coat lies buried, the earth no longer burns, only breathes. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.